Morning. Um, I've been thinking about uh, my first of all, what I want to talk about in my next video. I think I'm gonna start off with um, my love of video games, more specifically, how Sony made me fall in love with the Switch, aka Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. Try to keep this as short as possible. Hopefully, not a 2 hour video, but I think in terms of like context, it's important for me to kind of track and display the beginning of my love for video games from when I was a child, and then as an adolescent. I mean, as a baby, as a child, adolescent, and then as a middle-aged man. Oh, I don't know if you can see in the background. That's my cat, Beef. He's sleeping. He's a little mad at me because I didn't give him a lot of food. I gave him some food, but he always wants like seconds. So I might give him seconds right after this, but we'll see. We'll see how this turns out. Okay. Anyway, like I said, um, what you have to understand is I'm a child of the 80s. So I was born in the decade of, the death of disco, um, movies like The Never Ending Story, The Karate Kid, um, Bloodsport, Rambo, Predator. A lot of these things, as far as in terms of like pop culture, really hit their stride around the 80s, the age of decadence, right? And what goes along with that is this emergence in like the economy. Certain sectors were hit hard. Technology was just flourishing. We had Betamax and VHS, and then towards like the beginning of like the 80s, we moved away from like the Atari 2600, which was like reigning around like the late 70s, early 80s. And my time with the Atari 2600, this is the child, this is the baby years, well, mind you. My grandfather, he was a big gamer. He purchased the Atari, and the 2600 I had, it had almost like a wooden frame to it, but it was mixed with like plastic. It looked really awesome back in the day. Had these little switch knobs, little metal knobs you can turn and adjust the settings and stuff like that with it. And it had these like really chunky cartridges, black cartridges that you just plop into the top of the console and play. And I remember the games like Pitfall, where basically you see this little pixel guy jump from crocodile to crocodile, swinging these brown pixelated vines. It was one of my favorite games as a child, as a baby. When I say baby, I mean like 7, 6, 8 years old. Playing Tomcat and Pac-Man. These games really like lit that fire, and playing that with my grandfather was some of my favorite memories growing up. Because my grandfather, he was pretty good, so he was in the arcades, he was playing, um, and it really lit a fire for me to kind of like, okay, what else can I do? Like, can I figure out one day to play these games? My little hands, gripping the controller. Um, and then towards the mid to late 80s, we saw I had the opportunity to play Nintendo. My mom, I had the honor roll. My mom went out, purchased a Nintendo, had the Duck Hunt and Mario combo, and she also bought. I think a year or two down the line, she bought the Legend of Zelda, but I'll get to that later. Um, but I remember having Duck Hunt, and Mario, having the Zapper controllers, orange and gray, um, toy remote gun where you plug into the Nintendo console and you're able to shoot like ducks and stuff like that. My sister, she's like the master at it. She's like, even to this day, like I can't, I can't touch her. But it was really fun. I'll play the controller and she had the gun, or those times were really, really great. And Nintendo was able to kind of capture the wonder of like games of like Pac-Man and Pitfall, and kind of go a step further. Colors are a little more vibrant. The pixels are a little more solid and clear in clarity. You were able to kind of like see your character in more defined ways. Jumping on Goombas and catching like the fire plants and jumping up and hitting the flags and saving the princess. There was like integrated stories within the gameplay, and even to this day, they have kept that same tightness and innovation in their gameplay. And I was a big fan of Nintendo. And to some parts I am, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. And then, like I said, my mom, she purchased The Legend of Zelda, and I have to kind of like pause when I say, when I first got that game, the gold wrapper, the gold look of it, the cartridge was gold. Like it was something I'd never seen before. I was totally taken aback. Um, it meant that this game was special. It meant that I was special to even just play it. And then I turned it on and got into it, and it was hard, dude. Like I was dying like constantly. I remember like just putting it away for like months, even to the point of like just like giving it up and giving it to my cousin because like back then I was like maybe 9 or 10. I was approaching 10. Um, and it was just not, I couldn't get through it. I could not get through it. And like I said, I'll come back to like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but what really impressed me about Zelda was not only the difficulty. Like the difficulty was was definitely impressive, but the music. The music was timeless. The gameplay, it was very fast. Um, you had to watch every corner. You would go into one room and it'd be totally fine. You go into another room and you get like wasted. You get destroyed from all sides sometimes. Um, but I remember just having the opportunity to play that game and the feelings that I felt. I was truly in Hyrule. I was truly on the pursuit of trying to find Princess Zelda. And even though I never did that, I never completed it, it always stuck with me. Just the experience, like having Zelda, playing Zelda, getting Zelda, um, the game. It was a truly like memorable experience. And Nintendo ensured that, and their marketing and their packaging and even in the presentation of the game. Um, so then, towards my adolescence, Nintendo started to drift over into like Super Nintendo. They developed the Super Nintendo, and the graphics and the processing speed were totally light years away from Nintendo. Things like F Zero, Star Fox, even the Mario games like Donkey Kong. A lot of these games are just blowing the competition away, up to the point where Sega um, started developing Sonic. And see, I didn't have enough money to purchase Super Nintendo. Sega was a little more economical for my family. And some people at school they kind of like you know talk down because of that. But I mean, I didn't care when I first turned on the Sega console and played Sonic and noticed that this is way different than Mario. Not only in the character, being a blue hedgehog, but just the attitude, the vibe of the game, the music. The music was really, really good. Even to this day, Sonic music is like top tier music. Um, but I remember that like the speed of the character and how Sega presented that throughout the different worlds, um, the different characters I was interacting with, Robotnik, just being an asshole, locking up animals and stuff like that, turn them into robots, and try and attempt to turn them into robots. The level design, I mean, Jesus, every level within the first Sonic was different, required different mechanics and different ways to kind of like navigate how to move Sonic within that world. You couldn't go too fast, but you had to go fast enough to get away from certain aspects. Certain aspects of the level. Those were really really good, and that stuck. those games, especially Sonic and Knuckles, playing Sonic and Knuckles, having the Sonic 3 cartridge and then locking it into the Sonic 1. I mean, there's a lot of innovation back in the day. Um, and then a lot of the innovations kind of gave birth to, like, you didn't quite understand like what was going on behind the scenes. And the only way you kind of could understand what's going on behind the scenes with like games and the game companies were through game magazines like Electronic Gaming Magazine Monthly and Game Pro. These kind of shed some light into the development of the game. I remember when I don't want to jump too much of it. I remember when they were developing the Dreamcast, and there was like at least maybe a 5 or 10 page expose on like the Dreamcast coming out, and the Dreamcast it was ahead of its time back in the day, and it was one of those systems where there was so much potential, there was so much innovation within that console, and Sega put everything they had into it, and there were a lot of great games for the Dreamcast. And it was the next step from me moving over from the Genesis, Sega Genesis. I didn't purchase Saturn; it was way too much. I didn't purchase 32X. Still, it was weird looking, and it was way too much money. I had to wait and wait and wait and wait until years later, until the end, unfortunately, of the Sega line with the Genesis. I didn't even purchase the handhelds either. Um, but I knew for about almost like 10 years I was dead set with Sega. Like, I was a Sega fanboy. And like back in the day, um, early to late 90s, we had the console wars, between Nintendo and Sega. Um, uh, it was a great time because you would go to school and say, like, I can do this, and I can play this game, and you don't have this game, and Super Nintendo has way better graphics and processing power than Genesis. And when Mortal Kombat came, at least we have blood in our Mortal Kombat game for the Genesis. What did you guys have? You guys had like what, green blood, or not even no blood at all. Those are what the game companies were doing back in the day to kind of like differentiate between the violence. Like, Sega would welcome the violence. They didn't really shy away from it. Whereas the Super Nintendo and Nintendo company, they kind of wanted to. We have our market. We want to keep it the way it is. So we will get those games, but we will modify them so that they appeal to those game companies. So it was a really great time back in the day. And like I said, with those game magazines, you were able to catch a glimpse into the development cycle. You didn't really get a feel of like the egos of the developers or the game studio. They kind of just they were maybe you can kind of qualify them as like puff pieces for the games and game companies back in the day, but it was something that you didn't experience before. I always want to know what what was required in making that game. How is this game going to be presented once it came out? And you could find those little nuggets of information within those magazines. Um, so getting back to the Dreamcast, start to notice that games are taking a little bit longer to come out, and there's a new system on the horizon called the Sony PlayStation. People were talking shit about it. What does Sony know about video games? This is obviously going to flop. Um, but then things started to turn around. Games like Battling to Shinden, some of the first games that came out, Warhawk. A lot of these games are pretty good. And the graphics on them weren't necessarily better than what were on the Dreamcast. But the advent of Sony having a lot of games out the gate, a lot of diverse games coming out the gate, kind of set a new standard. And it seemed like Dreamcast could not catch up. And what made me jump ship with um, Sony was, unfortunately, my Dreamcast died. And it was probably my second Dreamcast. And I was heartbroken. I had a lot of these games that are on it, and we didn't want to purchase a third. we didn't want to jump out there and purchase a third. So my sister, she did really good on the honor roll, and parents took us out to this weird like surf and turf restaurant out in Laurel, Maryland. It's no longer there anymore. But right across the street was a Best Buy, and I noticed that my dad told me like stay in the car. I'm getting something real quick, and I was like, okay, you got something? You put it in the trunk, and we drove to the restaurant from Best Buy, and then we were celebrating our sister, and then he went out to the car, got the stuff out there, and said, hey, I want to let you guys know, I know you guys did really well in school, and I know you guys were kind of bummed about the Dreamcast, but I heard some good things about this console, the Sony PlayStation console. So here we go. And me and my sister we lost our shit. Um, uh, it was really good. It was really good. We were not expecting it, and there's like a couple of games on that too. We got Battle into Shinden, uh, which is like a back then. Well, yeah, it's like a Tekken Soul Calibur type game where you can, you have these characters from various places on Earth, and, battle out and battle into Shinden, and you can ring out people and knock them out of the stage and stuff like that, or knock them really far in the air and out of the stage. It was really good. It was really good. And then Warhawk with this like Ace Combat, but it had this really dark, twisted, like alien vibe to it. Almost eldritch like type horror to it. But it was very different. Like I like Warhawk, the plane and things you could do, your barrels, and you do your missiles out and stuff like. It was a really good game. It was a really good game. Very dark. And what made us stick with Sony was that the diversity in their games. You would play one game, you would be playing, a fighting game, and the next game you'd be playing a side-scrolling game. But how's that different from Nintendo? Just the quality of the games. They started to improve rapidly up until the point where um, we no longer went back and played some of our old console games. You know, Sony had a grip on what people wanted to play. They had a different vibe. They knew they were the new dogs in the industry, and they bust their ass to make sure that you would recognize what they were. Um, games like Jet Moto, ESPN Extreme Games, which is some of my favorite games. They had a lot of great music to it. But those games, it was hard for me to put down. Madden, NFL, um, they're really really good, great games. And then along the years, we came out with like PlayStation 2, which dominated what the PlayStation 1 had laid the foundations to. Games like Jack and Daxter 2, Ratchet and Clank, Spider Man. A lot of these games that made companies that you see today laid the foundations on the PlayStation 2. Um, and things were looking really bright. I was enjoying the console. I was a former Sega fanboy. Now switched over to Sony. I still had a heart and I still had a place in my heart for Sega and Sonic, but for the most part, the writing was on the wall. I was Sony ride or die because they were offering stories and games and cinematic experiences that I wasn't seeing on other consoles, or I didn't give the opportunity to see on other consoles. Um, and then, like all things, like with success, you fly really, really high to the sun, and sometimes sometimes you get smacked down, and it happened with the PS3. And without going too much into the history of it, Sony, seeing the success of the PlayStation 1 and the dominance of the PlayStation 2, um, they felt that the PlayStation 3, in terms of marketing, deserved a more ostentatious and avant garde and classist type of marketing experience. Like only the super wealthy. You had to work like two jobs. I think even the CEO once said that you're gonna have to work two jobs even to afford the system. And people are like, "What? What are you talking about?" The system was really really expensive. The architecture was incredibly difficult, all the way up to the end of the console. They kept putting in ads that you can put you know 100 or 200 PS3s together and make yourself like a supercomputer or a server, whatever. They were just really going off on you know marketing this thing as the next generation of consoles, and the games on PlayStation 3 were decent, but they weren't at the same class as they were at the PS2. You start to see developers, third party developers, just like, listen, I can develop for this game, but it's going to take like a lot, at least your first party to kind of like pull out the raw power. And you saw game companies like Naughty Dog, like Sony Santa Monica, like Insomniac, um, like Bend. They were able to kind of pull the juice of what the potential of the PlayStation 3 can do, and you see that in their games. But this was a dark time for PlayStation. They got really high on their own supply, and thought that they could do no wrong. And this is something that has returned, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But this is the mindset that Sony has gotten into presently. But having a PlayStation 3, playing. I still have my PlayStation 3. It's still around here somewhere. I have a couple of games for it. I still love it as a console. But it had its flaws, and a lot of its flaws had to do with the marketing campaign. A lot of the flaws had to do with um, some of the games that came out. They weren't. Some of them weren't all up to snuff. You know, but that started to kind of like drift over into like the PlayStation 4, where they kind of had a different kind of vibe to them, where they were kind of getting back to like square one. Um, let's kind of like dial back some of our marketing, or make it focus on the games, and um, not so much of the architecture, but like the experience of being a PlayStation owner. And you saw that in a lot of the games that came out. You saw that in how they treated like their online services, which even to this day has been um, not entirely great, um, but you see them making an attempt. Um, but they were fine tuning a lot of their online features with like the PlayStation 4. They started dipping their toes into it within the PlayStation 3, but it didn't really like bear fruit up to the PlayStation 4. And I love the games on the PlayStation 4. What To get to where I am now as a middle aged man, I purchased a PS5 during the dark days of when um, a lot of scalpers were just snatching them up, selling them at exorbitant rates. I was a sucker. Unfortunately, I went out there and paid 2x of what it should have been purchased. And back then, there weren't that many games for it, but I just had to have it. It was something where I worked hard for it. I deserved it. Yes, it did remind me of like the PlayStation 3 days, where a certain it was a class, a status um, commodity. Saying that almost like purchasing an Apple product. If you those who have Apple, they know. But having a PlayStation 5, I do like a couple of the games. Um, Playing God of War, the new God of War Ragnarok, I believe took me back a little bit, because I had these expectations from the 2018 version. Stellar story, stellar pacing, stellar character development, Everything was top notch. Um, and then things just wavered within Ragnarok. Um, and I wouldn't say Ragnarok was the first indicator of me kind of like, maybe I need to re-examine my love for Sony. It began towards Uncharted 3, where the level of the story design, and I'm a story guy. I love great character development. I love story-driven games. I love gameplay just as much as anybody else. I think it's a nice peanut butter and jelly type of vibe where you need great gameplay and great storytelling, but there can be times where you have games that have great story, and not so much great gameplay, and you kind of can soldier through until you experience all the story. But to get back to my case, with Uncharted 3, you start to see like this the stability, the consistency of quality with Naughty Dog and how they were crafting their character for Nathan. You could see it start to shake. And that was probably one of my least favorite Uncharted games was 3. But a lot of these games were like few and far between. A lot of these like shaky, you know, not so consistent games. There were few and far between on Sony, because everything was top tier. Everything was, cinematic. Everything was marketed in a way that demanded your attention, demanded you to, you're going to have to carve some time out of your day, maybe take a day off to play these games, to experience these games. And that's what Sony built throughout the years. We are an event. When we make our games, especially our first party games, they are an event. And they were to some extent. They were to some extent. Um, but I think what was one of the final nails in the coffin for me, that made me kind of like drift over, um, was the heavy. Well, I'll say three. First one was the heavy um, use of looking into multiplayer online experiences. Sony is not really strong in that category, and they purchased like Bungie to kind of help them fine tune and lock in a lot of those gaps, to become a market leader in some of those experiences. But it's not. It's something that has never been edge of mind for me as a gamer. I don't. It's not that I don't like multiplayer. I prefer single player experiences. I prefer story driven experiences, character driven experiences, gameplay, um, tight gameplay experiences. And I started to see a lot of their games not only drift from being, tacked on with multiplayer, but I started to see the games that came out with a focus on story driven experiences or tight gameplay start to just falter. I saw that with Last of Us 2. I saw that with Infamous. I saw that with the new God of War Ragnarok, um, Ratchet and Clank. The new Ratchet and Clank, it's great. It's great, but it still has not captured the same heart and tight gameplay of the older Ratchet and Clanks, and that's okay. The graphics are beautiful, the set pieces are beautiful, but again, you start to see like this almost sameness in their games. How they're told, how they're presented. They may have different characters, but there's a house style to a lot of the Sony games that are coming out now. And I for the longest time I tried to ignore it. I tried to put it away, and say no, you guys are just ragging on it. Like these are totally diverse stories, and give the gameplay a chance. Yeah, it's not the greatest gameplay, but just give it a chance. Now I can't co-sign with that anymore. I just can't. Um, so those two nails were sameness in their game development and how they present their games and how you experience their games as a game player, and the heavy use in pursuing multiplayer online experiences, live services, as it were two of the nails in my coffin, because Sony didn't come out the gate um, as an online service, live service company, but they're seeing all the revenue these live service games are making, and they're saying like, listen, we gotta get a piece of that. We gotta jump into that. And that's, as a company, I have fully understand that. I understand that pursuit, but it's just when you start to lag on a lot of the core systems and core traits that were the foundations of your company, when those suffer in pursuit of another, something that you're not really tight on, then the focus and vision and excitement that I used to have as a Sony fan kind of wanes. And then the final death nail was the Sony showcase. And you have to understand, I don't think we had a Sony showcase in what, 2 years, for 2 years, 2 or 4 years. And it was being hailed as like, this is going to, I believe the CEO, something to the effect that this is going to be hailed as like one of the best showcases or something to that effect. This is going to redefine um, the industry, as it were. And we saw during that showcase, we saw a couple indie games, mainly game trailers without gameplay, um, shooters. Fine, if you love shooters, that's great, but that can't be the entire library of the new games that's coming out. That's insane. And then we saw a modified trailer for Spider-Man, which was great, which I think somewhat saved it. But then we saw like a movie trailer to Gran Turismo in a showcase, and I'm on top of like a handheld for the system, and I'm like, what is this? Is not redefining anything. This is just, it's safe, it's mid, it's not, and maybe it's my fault that I got my expectations high, but it made me feel like it brought me back to how the PlayStation 3 rolled out. A lot of their marketing was just, look at us, we're the best that ever was. Look at all our weird, you know, weird presentations and stuff like that. It didn't sit right with me. And I was like, here Sony goes again. They're going to like they're riding high right now with the success. They're selling systems, and they feel that they're untouchable. They feel that like they can't do anything wrong. They can say whatever they want, and people are just gonna eat it up and buy it. And it was just like, where are the games? Where's the gameplay? Where's the game? Where are the things that made this company to what it is? I'm only speaking about PlayStation. I'm not talking about Sony. I'm only talking about PlayStation. Um, and like I said, as a company, I understand you have to diversify your portfolio. You know, a lot of stuff has happened since in the past 5 to 10 years, let alone 2 years. And maybe the argument could be made that games are not profitable anymore. We have to look to other verticals, and I understand that. Um, but it was one of the final straws. One of the best games that I've played in 5, maybe 7 years on any console was Elden Ring, and it wasn't even a Sony game. And that was like never the case like 15, 20 years ago. Most of the top tier games that I've ever played were from Sony. And Elden Ring did everything the industry was not doing. You um, they treated their audience and their customers with respect. They valued their time. And what I mean by treating their customers with respect and valuing their time, they didn't have their entire UI was not plastered with status updates and you know mission pings and you know different color HUDs. You saw the world as it was laid out as a character, um, and that was it. There's no extra side talking, internal monologue from the character for every little action that you were doing. It was a wholly different experience. It was an experience that I've never. Well, it took a long time for me, but and I don't even remember an experience that I never had before where I was completely immersed in that game. Um, Other people can kind of maybe draw some kind of comparison between like Skyrim or something like that. I played Skyrim. This Elden Ring is totally different from Skyrim. It's in another league from Skyrim. And yes, the way it tells its story is not the standard way that you would tell your story, but I think I think Elden Ring showed the industry that it is possible to make a complete game. To make a game where we're not demanding microtransactions from you, where we are treating your characters with respect, and your time. Um, if you want to play it for this difficulty, fine. If you don't want to play it, that's also fine. It's one of my favorite. Long story short, it's one of my favorite games to come out. Next to Red Dead 2, it's one of my favorite games. Um, so yeah, those three things: pursuit for live services, um, drifting away from their core tenets as far as character-driven, story-driven, cinematic, um, tight gameplay experiences, and their ego. Their ego drifting back to the PlayStation 3 days, where they could do no wrong, were was a reason where um, my eye wandered over to the Switch. And you have to understand, I've been on the other side of the pond, and when I mean other side of the pond is I mean the other side of like Sega, Sony for like decades. I did not look at all at Nintendo. I did not care what Nintendo did. Their games never appealed to me. Um, and I felt confident in it. I felt pride in it. I felt like, I mean, yes, I understand some people play them casually, but like I am a dogged Sega Sony fanboy, ride or die. And my sister, she did a wonderful thing for me. She noticed that I knew that I was always talking about, maybe I want to play Zelda. It's looking right. Like I dogged it when I dogged Breath of the Wild when Horizon Zero Dawn came out because like everybody was giving like the perfect score. So like, how this game is perfect? This game can't be perfect. Like there's someone has to be paying these people to say that. Um, and me playing Horizon, I thought like, of course this is better than Zelda. Like of course. Until I played Breath of the Wild, and then like like the Matrix, I can see, I believe, I understand what everybody's talking about. Breath of the Wild, and like when what my sister did, she purchased the OLED um, Tears of the Kingdom Switch. So it's this beautiful like white Switch with the gold emblem, Hyrule emblem on it. Um, I went out and bought a Tears of the Kingdom controller. I mean Breath of the Wild controller. Um, I bought Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom same day. Um, but that whole event, that whole experience, brought me all the way back to when I was a child, and when I first got the Legend of Zelda in that gold cartridge, gold box, and just the presentation of it. Not even playing the game yet, just the overall presentation of it. Um, like literally, if I had the old Legend of Zelda, the old '80s Legend of Zelda, I would just put it like in a frame because like the cartridge is very beautiful. But I'm getting off topic. I didn't understand how good this game was until I actually played it. And when I mean played it, I think it makes sense why I love it. A lot of this game, I can see a lot of Elden Ringisms in Breath of the Wild. um, where you have no idea what lies beyond this ridge, or what new item lies over there, and the game does not hold your hand or push you to go over there. You're completely free to do whatever you want, whenever you want. Um, just two reasons. You can't do everything you want, but like the level of freedom and exploration, I've literally spent hours in that game. Not even doing the missions, just trying to find the shrines, trying to get the Korok seeds, trying to get better weapons. Not even like even doing the story, you know. And I beat it already. I've downloaded the DLC. I beat that. Um, but what I'm trying to say is, playing Breath of the Wild reignited the same fire that I had when I was younger, the same fire that I was searching for as a gamer in the Sega and Sony years. And I'm not saying that fire never existed throughout that time. I'm saying that like as you get older, your tastes change, your passions change. Some things that you were really red hot when you were younger kind of fade away. They do fade away, not kind of. They do fade away. Some people say that they it may be sustained, but I mean, to each their own. What I'm trying to say is, I've never been as engrossed, as involved in a game as I have been playing Legend of Zelda. The only the only game that's made me be the only game that's captured my attention this much has been Elden Ring, and it makes sense because those games are similar in how they're designed. Um, the amount of respect they give freedom, give you as a gamer, as a player, freedom. And without like dragging on this video ad nauseum, I just want to say, in my heart, I am still a Sony fan. I still believe great games are on the horizon. I still believe the company is a good company, but they're going a direction that I can no longer. They're going a path I can no longer follow. And I'm not saying I'm on the Nintendo path. What I'm To clear it up, what I'm trying to say is Nintendo right now within Tears of the Kingdom, and it can always change. Like it can always change, but I think Legend of Zelda um, represents an aspect that I'm trying to follow as an individual, um, and that is if something you love doesn't love you, then maybe it's not worth investing your love in it. What I'm trying to say is, if there's something that you care about, if there's some hobby, some individual, some endeavor that you care about, that you've poured your heart and soul into, that you've given countless hours into supporting and repping, and they just don't seem to be giving it back, then you're free to like drift off and find those things that do light your fire, that do give your passions, that let your passion soar. And I think The Legend of Zelda, playing that game, is one of the best feelings I've had as a gamer. Um, it's one of the best experiences I've had, and I've just like cracked open Tears of the Kingdom. I'm going into depths that's making me feel like Caleb, but like I'm loving every minute of it. Um, Baldur's Gate 3 has come out, and I'm kind of looking at that a little bit. But like Armored Core is coming out, and I'm looking at that as so I have like games that are pinging that have my attention. But right now, I have not turned on my PlayStation 5 in like 2 to 3 months. It's been straight Legend of Zelda repeat. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This video is how Sony made me love the Switch, aka Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And like I said, these are my opinions, like everything, love it or hate it. Um, but this is something that means a lot to me. Um, being a gamer, um, having creative inclinations. I write, I draw. Maybe someday I'll show those things. Um, they mean a lot. And right now you're seeing I don't want to get too preachy, but you're seeing an attack on creatives. And this war, this attack, this exploitation of creatives has always existed. But like I said, you know, there's a way. Um, there's a way to follow your passions without hurting people. There's a way to honor those things. And if those companies are not doing that for you, if those individuals are not doing that for you, find those things that are. Okay. That's it. If you like my rant and what I had to say, feel free to like, share, subscribe. Um, Hopefully, in my next video, I'll try to be as as streamlined as possible. But I think I like this format, so we'll see in the comments, see what everybody says. But like I said, take care of one another. Have a great day.